Hi, you're watching Talking About. I'm John Griffith, and today I have something familiar yet different planned for you. We're doing our first long-distance interview. My guest, if you've been watching the show for any amount of time, it will be a familiar face to you. I have Randy Schmidt on the line. We're going to be chatting about his writing and his new book, Dolly on Dolly, Interviews and Encounters with Dolly Parton. So I want to welcome to the screen, Randy. There you are. Good to see you.
Hi. Well, it's great to see you again.
And all
Thanks
the
so
way
much
from
for having me.
Texas.
Yeah, just right outside of Texas, right outside of Dallas, Denton, Texas.
Okay. Well, you've been a busy guy since we saw each other face to face. You've edited and worked on quite a few books between Little Girl Blue and this, which is focused on Dolly Parton. You've also written on and about Judy Garland. Do you have a specific attraction to the divas?
I guess I've kind of gone back into the people that I've loved since I was a kid. Of course, my first book was the Karen Carpenter book, Little Girl Blue, that came out 7 years ago, and that's when I first appeared on your show.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it was just a few weeks after that book came out that my editor said to me, "So, what's your next book?" And that was the last thing I expected to hear him say.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of caught me off guard, and I started trying to think about, what would I write about if I had this opportunity. And I think that the Karen Carpenter book in my mind at that time was the only book that I had in me. And so it was shortly thereafter that I discovered this series of books that they had, and wanted to contribute to that. And it was first Judy Garland that came to mind for that, and then more recently Dolly Parton. So yeah, I do have an attraction for the divas, I guess. I have my favorites.
Well, some of the differences between the Karen Carpenter book and the Judy and the Dolly books is the Karen Carpenter book. I'm sure everything has extensive research done, but you put together a specific narrative telling Karen's story.
Right. It was more of a traditional biography, a straightforward biography written start to finish by me. And the book on Judy Garland and now this one on Dolly has a little bit different approach. And I think it's worked for me nicely in the fact that I'm a elementary music teacher by day.
Okay.
And so my day job, for most of the year is teaching music. And to be able to put out a book every few years, that's almost impossible when you're talking about a traditional biography.
Right.
But for something in a series like this, it's more of a compilation. It's still very time consuming, and there's lots of research and work that goes into it. But it's more of a 2-year kind of project versus something that could easily be 5 to 10 years if it were more of a traditional book like that.
Through the years, there have been several books specifically about Dolly, including some that she's had a great hand in co-authoring.
Right.
What do you find differentiates the way that you're presenting her story through these interviews as to how it's been told before?
Well, and that was one of the things I had to kind of convince my publisher of, because Dolly had done her own autobiography back in '94, a highly successful autobiography called My Life and Other Unfinished Business. And it was on the New York Times bestseller list for, I think, several months. And so in presenting this and in pitching it to my publisher, what really sets this apart from her other books especially is that it is in her own words, but it's over the past 50 years. It's a collection of interviews beginning all the way back in 1967 and going up through recent years. So we get to kind of trace the evolution of Dolly in her own words. Okay. And how she was viewed in the press. And so it's sort of an autobiography traveling with her through time, if that makes sense.
It does, and it's interesting to see not just how she developed as an artist, but how she developed Dolly, for lack of better phrasing, because she is as much person as character And I don't mean that in an insulting way, but
Oh, not at all. And she really she considered herself, and still does. She considers Dolly a character. You know, it's an extension of herself.
hmm
But I think one of the things that surprised me most in putting this book together was that she really approached it in that way. What will she have Dolly say this year? Or what will Dolly wear? Or how will Dolly approach this or that? And so, sort of in the same way that Cassandra Peterson is Elvira,
right.
Dolly Parton is this extension of Dolly Rebecca Parton,
Okay.
that grew up in the hills of Tennessee, and her hair just continued to get bigger, and other things continued to get bigger. And
Well, that's the parallel with Elvira, I suppose, since you brought up the analogy, Elvira with the large wig and emphasizing her curves.
exactly. And I think that Dolly, from what she said, and these interviews are, of course, in the book, she wanted the image to sell the music and the music to sell the image. In some cases, people were fans of hers because of the music. In other cases, they were drawn to her by this over-the-top image, this larger-than-life character that she created, and that drew them to the music when they may not have otherwise been.
Okay, I've never had the privilege of conversing with her, but I have been in the same room with her, and just in developing the persona and the presentation, I fully understood when I saw her in person the reasoning behind the big wigs. Otherwise, she would look like boobs on a stick.
Such a tiny, tiny person, right?
Yes.
Barely over 5 feet tall, and the waist is around 18 inches. I don't know what it is anymore, but it's not much more than that, if any.
Yeah, but I mean, it's such a great talent in such a petite package, in overall petite package. I mean, when people think of her, they think of the more curvier aspects. Physically, when they think of her, they think of the curvier aspects. But she's literally the full package, and it's interesting to follow how she develops from the person who came essentially from nothing into the person who she is, and the journey of coming to terms with it and building that.
Right, and I kept going further back in the interviews, thinking that at some point I would find traces of, somebody that wasn't maybe quite as confident or quite as sure that she was going to be a star. And from the very first interviews that I was able to go back to, she had that same determination and that tenacity that is still present today. I mean, I think she was maybe a little more reserved in those early interviews. But these interviews they go back to when she was 21 years old and living in an apartment in Nashville, and she had yet to meet Porter Wagner. So this was before her career really took off. And so to go from that and her already kind of have this in mind that she doesn't just want to be a star, she wants to be a really big star that shines bright. And when she became the biggest star that she possibly could in the country music world, then that wasn't enough for her. She wanted to go further, and she wanted to branch out. And now, I mean, everybody crosses over, but back then, for a country star like Dolly to cross over was kind of seen as the act of being a traitor. And she talked though about she wasn't leaving country music; she was taking it with her. And I really think that has shown through in everything she's done, whether it's been rock or pop oriented albums and TV and movies and things. The true Dolly rings through, I think, in her heart, and her country is always with her.
Exactly, and it's quite the journey, and she embraces the entire roller coaster ride. From everything that I've seen and read, and it's like the highs are really high, the lows are really low, and she strikes me as the type of person who can just be on that roller coaster and throw her arms in the air and scream with excitement, fear, and joy all at once.
Right, and she isn't afraid to share those darker sides, especially in the early days. I feel like in more recent years, she might be sort of trying to tie up her legacy in a nice, pretty bow, if that makes sense. And I've kind of compared the Coat of Many Colors TV movie that she's done recently, and then a follow-up to that, Christmas of Many Colors. It's very much like Little House on the Prairie, glimpse into her childhood and into her life. And while I don't think that she necessarily is ashamed of anything she came from, I think a lot of these earlier interviews are very telling. To go back and to hear her talk about dealing with depression and dealing with, even thoughts of suicide and things like that. That's not something we usually think of in relation to Dolly, but she
Right.
was very, very open, especially in the 1980s and early 90s in a lot of these interviews. And I think that's one of the other things that makes this unique. These are all things she said and that she's
Hmm.
approved in print over the years and in different formats and different media. But to have it all in one place is, I think, what makes this unique and a really great collection.
No, absolutely, and I really respect the openness, and I also understand the intelligence behind, to being upfront with your personal truth, and as a way to control the message as well. So if you don't want if you want, okay, yeah, you want the publicity of the tabloid, but you don't want the tabloid to be spinning all out lies, you get out there and you make the statement. And she had
Right.
an early ability to do that before everyone else was.
I think there was really a plan. When you look at when she first got with Sandy Gallen as her manager back in the late 1970s, there was this concentrated effort to have her all over the place at just the right time, on the cover of every magazine and every tabloid. And then as she said, when it got to the point of, oversaturation or almost oversaturation, they would pull her from everything.
Hmm.
And you still see that to a point because, every few months there's a new statement coming out about Dolly Parton, whether it be like recently, and she has a new children's album coming out in about a month or so. And I think that they are very careful about keeping her name in the press and in media of all kinds, but not overdoing it, never oversaturating. And I think that that's stuck with her over the years. She's always there, but never quite enough to make it overkill.
And she's managed to keep a significant portion of her personal life private as well, which is
Absolutely.
a rarity in and of itself, especially
Yeah.
in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, I think she's surrounded herself with very loyal people who, even after they've left her, they're not the type to go out and sell out or tell her secrets and things like that. She is a very, very private person, and so while there are some extremely private things shared within this book, I think that she keeps many secrets, and she says right off the bat something I used in the introduction of the book. She says that she's even she wants to keep that mystery about her, and that sometimes she's even mysterious to herself. She doesn't know what she's going to do. One day she doesn't think that she would do something that she doesn't think about the next day, I'm going to do this, but then all at once she surprises herself by coming out with something completely off the wall and different. And in a way, she reinvents herself without, like I said, without ever leaving that country, that heart that is Dolly. But she finds ways to insert herself into different parts of society and pop culture. She just recently recorded a duet of Jolene. I don't know if you'd call it a duet or a larger group, but with Pentatonics.
Okay.
And then did a duet on Kesha's new album. And so, I mean, she finds a way to introduce herself to these fan bases of other artists, and I think in turn widens her own fan base.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we said, I mean, she's always branched out into more than just country music. I think one of my favorite surprises, just in my own journey of enjoying her work, was her cover of "Stairway to Heaven."
Oh yeah, things you would never imagine. She's done covers of "Lay Your Hands on Me" and things like that. So you think, how can she do this? But she does it in her own style and somehow makes it work. And she can pull off things that few other artists could, I think, in that way.
In putting this together, was there anything that really surprised you or opened your eyes to a different aspect of her person?
I think, some of the biggest surprises, like I mentioned before, the fact that there was never really a time in her interviews that she wasn't constantly looking forward to being a really big star. I think that was a little bit of a shock because I kept thinking I would go back further and, find somebody who was not quite so sure of herself, maybe a little insecure, and I never found that from her. It's also, I think, unique in Dolly's world that there aren't people that talk bad about Dolly, and not that I was ever looking for that, but nobody has anything bad to say, and if it is at all a negative, I think it's something that could be turned around as a positive. It usually has to do with her tenacity and her drive and her, striving to get things just right.
Mm-hmm.
But she's very much how I saw her as a kid. Whenever I first saw her on her TV show back in the late 1970s, she was like an angel to me, and I haven't found many things to discredit that. I think that she's an angel to a lot of people. And finding out what she's done with the Imagination Library, giving millions of books to children all over the world, and then recently with the wildfires that happened in the Great Smoky Mountains, giving thousands and thousands of dollars to these families who were displaced.
Right.
She's really given back to her community and to her home, to her hometown, and I think she's done that. She's had a Dolly Parton homecoming day since 1970, and she's always come home every year to share the wealth with her people, as she calls them.
Well, she's always been an advocate for the underserved or the disenfranchised.
Yeah, I think in many ways, exactly.
And it's wonderful to see, and I'm glad that you were able to put this all together in one place, so that people who may have a little bit of an idea of her journey can get a little bit more insight, especially it's just it glimpses of her at different moments in time.
Well, and I think that there are so many fun stories and things related in this. It's a humor-filled book. There are also some very poignant and serious subjects as well. But I think overall, people will really hear and feel Dolly's voice from start to finish in this. You can hear it in her voice, and I don't think there's any better way to hear the story. Even Dolly herself said in an interview, I really didn't want to write a book. She said that about her autobiography. I didn't want to write a book. I just want people to hear it and see me live it and hear it in the way that we do these interviews. And so that's kind of almost like her stamp of approval on this format, because she wanted people to see her live her life and to experience it as it went along. And that's what this book does, is to trace that life and career.
Did you have any direct feedback from her?
I haven't yet. I know that a book has reached her hands through her personal assistant, Steve Summers, who also has a copy. So through friends, we were able to get copies to her, and I don't know. There was some press that came out early on. The Daily Mail did some things. They go through when there's a new book, and they pull all the salacious material and they put it into one article.
Right.
And so that may have given her a negative look at it, but overall, it's a very positive and I think affirming look at her life, and overall a very light and happy look at this woman who's brought so much happiness and joy to so many people. So I hope she does take a deeper look at it and goes beyond some of those headlines that came out when it was first released.
Yes, and hopefully our viewing audience will do that as well.
Absolutely.
What are you working on next?
I'm not sure how many people would know this. I know it's not a household name or anything like that, but I've been working off and on for about 5 years on a project profiling Earl Carroll and Burl Wallace. Now, Earl Carroll, of course, of the Earl Carroll Vanities back in the time of the Ziegfeld Follies and George White scandals. Earl Carroll had a theater in New York City, and after he went bankrupt in New York City and the theater folded, he moved out west to Los Angeles and opened a theater in Hollywood and had another 10-year career there. And Burl Wallace was his star showgirl and really the star girl of his life. They had a quite long love affair. They both died, unfortunately, at the height of the theater's career in 1948 in a tragic plane crash in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of... It has all the makings, really, for a great screenplay, so let's hope it goes that far someday. But The book is tentatively titled Impresario,
Okay.
and the subtitle is Earl Carroll, Earl Wallace, and the Most Beautiful Girls in the World, which that's what he coined the phrase, the most beautiful, through these portals, past the most beautiful girls in the world, is what was on his sign and on the logo for many years.
Okay. Is there a timetable for release, or too soon to say?
It's due about this time next year, so
Okay.
hoping maybe early 2019.
Okay.
Which sounds like a long way away, but yeah, that'll be here before we know it.
It will, and hopefully we can have a nice chat about that when all
I
is
would
said
love
and done.
I'm excited because it's not a subject that everybody knows about, and it's really kind of an untold chapter in Hollywood history.
Okay. Well, looking forward to that. And the current book is Dolly on Dolly: Interviews and Encounters with Dolly Parton. Randy Schmidt, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me again.
My pleasure. Always great to hear from you and to talk with you.
Yeah, and to my best to you and your family. Is there a website where people can find out more about you?
Sure. RandyLSchmidt.com. That's RandyLSchmidt.com. And you can order books there, find book reviews and things like that, and drop me a line or add me on Facebook. And I love to chat with people who have read and enjoyed the books, and hope to get some new audience from your audience.
Yes, and the book is available online, and preferably at your local retailer. Support your local bookstore, my audience, because
Absolutely.
they're disappearing.
Any indie booksellers will be able to get it if they don't have it in stock at that time.
Okay. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time, and I want to thank the audience for watching. And you can find more about us on our YouTube page, as well as at www.talkingabout.info. Randy, thank you again, and we'll see you next time, audience.
Thanks so much.
Bye now.